What's up, everybody? We're here today with composer, producer Dave Dykstra, also Sync Titan Award recipient. We're going to talk about how to have a long lasting career and some very important ingredients to being successful and becoming a Sync Titan yourself.
Before we jump into the meat and potatoes of your story, I would love for you to just tell us about some of your most recent placements.
I'm a percussionist by trade, so a lot of what I do is very detailed rhythm stuff. So I really have gotten into doing texture-based cues that just have a lot of energy and a lot of action, a lot of builds, a lot of stops, cuts, and so that's been very conducive for sports and ads. So that's really what's been landing. I did a couple of projects last year and the year before that have gotten me NFL placements, NCAA football, NBA, MLB, basically all the sports that you can think of. I'm getting pretty regular placements on, and so I've been leaning into that as I've seen that success come in. That's kind of really what I've been focusing more on, and so and that's also led to some ad opportunities and also some custom work. So
yeah, I love that. That's a great. You're a great example of someone who leaned into a niche because you saw it working, so you lean into it, and that's really important. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's also cool. Like, so the first project I did that really I started to realize that this was like a special thing. I did a can I mention specific company names, or is that okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Okay, so I did an album for Megatrax called Percussion for Commercials, and it was my first project with their like main catalog, and I was super stoked to do it, and I also really appreciated the feedback because they're very hands-on with projects. So I'll send them tracks, they'll say, hey, this is let's do this, let's not do that, versus some other catalogs are more just like they'll take it or leave it. And so I feel like I've learned a lot working with them because they're helping me craft to make it as useful as possible, because that's what's the point if it's not going to be useful. And so that project I did for them has gotten like I couldn't even tell you, it's numerous syncs, and even just basically every quarter it's about half of my royalties, and have gotten more ad placements from that project even now, and that project came out in 2020, so it still has life to it 3 years later. And so they ordered another album of that specifically that I just put out in April. So again, looking and seeing, hey, what's working, and just keep doing that.
It's awesome.
Yeah, you got to definitely do your research. That's one thing I think that people don't realize is, you actually have to understand the market, and
Mm-hmm.
Leaning into a niche like what you're doing, that's when opportunities present themselves. But, a question that comes up often, it's always that hypothetical, question of, well, what's going to happen if, your answer there was fantastic, because in my opinion, most reputable, high quality representatives or catalogs or libraries are going to give you feedback because they want their catalog to be as valuable as possible, right?
Yes.
So, I always say, like, licensing does not happen in a vacuum. It is a people business, and so that story is fantastic because it exemplifies the fact that you actually do have a relationship with your representative, and
absolutely,
together you're working to create the best product possible.
Yes, and I think it's probably a people business. I know it's a people business first, because if you're gonna get feedback from them and then put up a fuss and not want to play ball, like they're the ones selling your music, and so you want to know that they believe in it too. So it makes sense, and often it's little tweaks like, hey, put a little transition here, put a break here. It's a lot of little details, and it can be arduous at times, but really it's all about making it as absolutely good as possible, and then the results kind of speak for themselves. The other thing I'll say to that too is, like, I think it's easy for people to look at like a publisher or a library or even another composer in sort of a combative sort of way, and they're not your enemy. Like, they want to succeed, they want to have good music. And so if you look at it from more of a, hey, we're trying to make the best music we can, from more of a building each other up mentality, I think it's more enjoyable, and I think again leads to better results.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's a long-term game. We always say it's not a race, it's a marathon. Um, and Dave, you're proof of that. I'd like to go back a little bit. Dave Dykstra, one of our Sync Titans, recipients of the Sync Titan Award. Dave, can you tell us more about your story, your background? Let everyone know more about yourself.
Yeah, and getting in the cool thing about Sync is I feel like it's a culmination of all of my other experience, like leading up into doing that. And I'll kind of explain. So, I grew up like most people playing in bands. I first was in the studio when I was a teenager, and I just immediately fell in love with that. So I knew I wanted to work in recording and in production from the time I was about 13, 14 years old. And I went to college, went to Belmont in Nashville, and kind of got into the scene doing that stuff. And actually right out of college, I did cruise ships. I played on ships because I wanted a gig where I didn't have to like worry about paying my bills. So I started doing that. And the cool thing about doing that is I did all these international cruises where we had like international guests from South America or France, or
Wow.
but also, and that really opened my ears to like doing a lot of different kinds of music, and also just digesting, because like you'd have digesting music. I mean, you'd have a guest come on and you'd learn the music in the 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We'd have like a 30-minute rehearsal, and then you play a show that night. So I got really quick at just like reading the music and digesting it quickly and performing it, and then going on to the next thing. And you could see the parallel with creating music for Sync already, right? So I whenever I'd be off the ship, I'd be here in Nashville, like trying to look for opportunities. I landed a tour with a guy named William Michael Morgan, who we got a #1, which was awesome. He was an artist with Warner. And I ran into just the classic horror story that you always hear about. So my first gig with him, he was on the charts at number 50. My last gig with him, we were on the charts at #1, and they literally came on the bus and fired everybody. Everyone, they just cleaned house, started from scratch, and the band was great. Like we all got along. It was just like totally, you hear those stories and it's like, oh, that'll, you just don't think it'll happen to you, but it was just a very blindsiding experience. Well, right in that same year, I helped a friend mix a production music project, which I didn't even know what that really was, and he kind of helped me learn about that business, and he had some connections in the sync industry. And so once I got fired from that, it kind of learned that I didn't want to be at the behest of somebody else anymore. Like I was, and I've played for a lot of different artists, but this was the one I think I really kind of learned my lesson, that like I needed to have something, first of all, that I can work on every day. So like if when you're on tour, like they'll take 2 months off, and then what are you going to do for 2 months? So I wanted something I could work on every day. I wanted something where I'm building my own name and not somebody else's name, and something that I can't be fired from and have the rug taken out from under me for absolutely nothing that I did. Another thing, so that next year, so that happened in 2016 was the tour and getting fired late in 2016. So in 2017, I was still playing a lot of gigs and out touring and stuff. I had an opportunity to, I was also, so in 2017, I was just writing as much stuff. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was just writing cues, like just whatever I could think of, hunting down briefs and just writing. And I did land my first album with Warner Chappell Production Music, and that was really cool. And that just having that name on the resume really helped kind of open some other doors as well. But I had an opportunity to fill in for Billy Currington. and it was on the same day as PMC. All right. And this is always like, is such a cool moment in my mind, in my kind of story, because all of a sudden I had this crossroads, because, I had always like hung my family out to dry, hung everybody out to dry to go play a gig, like whatever it takes to go play a gig for somebody. And here I had an opportunity to go play for like, a mega platinum artist. And I also had PMC. I knew nothing about production music really yet. And so I chose PMC over this gig with this A-list artist. And I just look back at that as like, I was staying true to what I had said earlier, is that I'm going to pursue this for myself and not be, tying myself to another, person. So since then it's been gigs in artist second, production music, and composing and trying to build my own work as a producer as my main goal. And it's been great. It's really been growing steadily, and really in the last 2-3 years I've just been absolutely booked nonstop solid with production work, doing recording artist projects as well as doing production music projects. So it's kind of like a mix of both. That's kind of the quick story of how I got to where I'm at now.
Well, you hit on something I think it's extremely important in that story, which is the decision. You actually made
Crossroads.
a
It
decision.
really was like a crossroads. I mean, it was like I couldn't be in LA and Nashville on the same day. I couldn't do it,
Yeah.
And so,
Over the years, especially when I was living in Los Angeles, I had a lot of friends who were out touring a lot. They would come off the road, similar story to yours. They would come off the road. The artist would choose to take 6 months off or 8 months off or whatever to, create a new record. But every time they came back into town after a year and a half of in and out of town quickly, out on tour, because you're out of town for a month, in town for a week, out of town, they would always say things to me like, man, I just want to do what you do. I just want to, I was playing on sessions at the time too. I just want to play on sessions. I just want to write music for TV. And my response would be to them, well, then stay in town.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is two different worlds,
Yeah. I mean, if this is what you want to do, you can't do it when 100% of your time is spent, on an airplane or on a bus or setting up or playing gigs or being in a new town or, especially at that time, we're having a home studio. You really had to have a home studio. Now you can throw it in a backpack. Right.
Right.
But still, I really, in my experience, and I know Jody's experience is the same, it comes down to those who are successful, the ones who actually make that decision to prioritize licensing, for the simple fact that licensing is not something you dip your toe into. It's not something like you get to a certain point, or like you play guitar, like I just want to learn some basic chords and then I'll be fine. Licensing it's either you get a placement or you don't. It's yes or no. It's off or on. There's no dipping your toe into
art.
it.
I mean, there's so many nuances to it, because it's not just writing a song and recording a song. I mean, like I was saying, with the back and forth with the publishers, like there's very specific things they're often looking for, so it's taken a lot to figure out some of those things. So it's not just like you throwing it together kind of deal.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jody.
Well, you mentioned something there. It's it's taken a lot of learning, right? I mean, can you think back on maybe pinpoint like a really big learning experience for you? Because we all have those. And you mentioned a crossroads. There's those moments that something happened where you're like, oh, and then it clicked into place.
Yeah, absolutely. One that always sticks out in my mind, again, talking about it being a people business, and we do so much over email or whatever. And I know a lot of people, they just feel like they're just emailing to the nothingness. And in a way you kind of are. And so again, like PMC is great because you're actually meeting human beings and you hang out and everything. So I wanted to do a project with, before they shut that branch down and moved it to LA, Warner Chappell Production Music had an office in Salt Lake City. And Brian Hofheinz is the one who ran it. And he's like mega trailer guy and just, kind of a titan in the industry in his own right. And so I was like, hey, I'll find an excuse to go to Salt Lake City, and I'll tell them I'm in town. And so I did that, and he agreed to meet up. I thought it would be like a 5 or 10 minute meeting because he's a busy guy. We ended up sitting in his office for 2.5 hours, and he just showed me. We just talked about music. We hung out, and so this is where the learning came in. Was he started showing me projects that he had in his pipeline, and every single one sounded absolutely stunning, mind-blowing, earth-shattering. Just the quality was so high and so good, and the mixes were so perfect. And that was just such an eye-opening experience that, like, okay, if you really want to do this, you've got to compete with that. That's your competition, And so, and I very easily was able to see, like, I felt like my writing ability was fine and my musical ability was fine, but my mixes and overall production quality wasn't quite there yet. And so the next few projects I did, this was about a year into doing production music. The next couple projects I did, I had mixed by somebody else because I was like, I need to figure out how to do this. And, the mixing is fortunately not something that I have to give away rights. I just was like, well, I'll just pay somebody to do it. And then in the meantime, I started working on my mixes and getting better at learning how to mix and having it sound more professional.
What's interesting about that, I love that story, is two big lessons here is obviously the commitment and then the investment. Making the investment to get on an airplane, get a hotel room
anyway, right?
It is.
It's
well,
fun.
connecting with people just in general,
Absolutely.
I think is a lot of fun. But on top of that, making that commitment of knowing or having the understanding of what your weakness is, and then making the investment in what you need to invest in to actually get a good quality mix, right? And it's interesting because I think a lot of musicians will look at that thought initially. They'll go, oh, I don't have money to invest into a mix. I don't have money to invest into someone mixing my song, because they're looking at it from the perspective of, I'm going to lose money, right?
Right.
But when you look at it for what it really is, if you have bad mixes, then all your time is wasted on the record anyway.
Yeah.
It's not going to go anywhere. But like what you said, Dave, you were confident in your writing. You were confident in the creation aspect of it. You weren't confident in the final mix process. So you hire a mix engineer, hire an expert. And if you think of, for every $10 you spend on that mix engineer, or every $100 you spend on that mix engineer, maybe the entire record costs $1,500 to mix.
I think exactly what it cost. So
sure. $1,500 investment, but is, let's say, a $10,000 paycheck worth the investment of $1,500?
Absolutely.
That's
and
that
the fact that
you're
making a product that's going to last your life, your whole life. You know what I mean? And so, definitely, it was a little terrifying at times because it was a tenuous period, because I was like, I've got a wife and kids, and at the time I had one kid and one kid on the way, and it's kind of scary. Or actually, no, I had just had my second child when all this stuff happened, when I, made this big transition. And so it was kind of like make or break, like this has got to happen, or I'm going to be doing something else, because, I got to provide for my family. And so one other little story, this was earlier on when I was first writing cues, the first time I paid someone to play on my stuff, and it wasn't even that much money. Like it was like $150, but I just felt like I was just burning $150, and I did not have a lot of money at the time at all. And it was just like it was a big pill to swallow. Like, okay, I'm really doing this. Like, and I probably made I'm certain I've made all of my money back at this point, but like, just by comparison, I probably paid out $40,000 in musician fees last year, so it's, and I actually really enjoy that now, because I love the idea of, hey, I'm supporting my local musicians and my friends, and like, it just makes the quality better and it leads to better results. So it's
and longer lasting relationships. That's, I mean, yeah.
And like you said, Michael, you know, a good cue, you're going to get 10x back on your investment.
Yeah.
Or
There's
more,
also
you know.
there's also the element of when you have skin in the game, it completely changes
Definitely
your work ethic. You know, we were talking before we went live on this. We were just talking about gear, right? And we were talking about like, you know, we've all been guilty of, you know, what, Cyber Monday. I'm guilty of it. Buying plugins for, you know, pennies on the dollar. But I'm also been guilty of, so that's in November, right? I'm literally guilty of having those files sitting in my download folder on my computer until like March.
Yeah.
The reason why is because I spent 40 or $50 on it because it was a good deal that came up, and normally it's like $500. So it sat for 4 or 5 months, 6 months, because there's, you know, really, it's $40. It's the cost of a dinner.
Yeah, you're buying it just in case. Yeah, half a tank of gas, right? You know, it's like.
But when you pay for that same plugin, when you pay $550 for that plugin, it comes into your inbox, you download it, and you immediately load it in, and you immediately start learning how to use it, and you immediately start utilizing it because you've got skin in the game. And now you're on a quest to not only make that money back, but then to amplify that investment. And that's why I feel like musicians who invest in themselves, I mean, all professional musicians invest in themselves, you know, whether it's in education, whether it's in gear. And that's a big thing too. You know, you've seen that as a touring drummer, as a touring musician, the musicians who are out there crushing it with the big tours, they don't play the little cheap $300 Fenders that you buy.
Everything is absolutely top notch, you know?
Yeah. There's a reason for that. They've invested in the best quality gear for their job. And when you think of a plumber, if you have a plumber coming to your house to fix the pipes, do you want them carrying those little, you know, play school plastic wrenches with them? Or do you want them carrying the big, thick, metal, heavy Craftsman wrenches that actually cost money and get the job done?
Right. Absolutely. Or same thing with like you go to the mechanic and they're putting your car up on bricks or something like that. Like, you know, they have they have a lift that probably cost them like $50,000, you know, so absolutely. You know, and I think you don't have to get it all at once. Like I tend to, when I'm investing, I mean, just like you said, you know, you invest, people will spend $100,000 to go to college, but then, you know, if it comes to buying a good sounding virtual instrument and it's $200, it's like, well, that's expensive. It's like, you just spent $100,000 on college, or, you know what I mean? So like, you got to have, these are your tools. Like, you've got to have good tools. You've got to, and again, like, investing in, the most expensive investment is people. Like, you invest in people when you're, if you are trying to do a project and it has a solo violinist on it, like, go find a great solo violinist, and then you don't have to convince anyone that it sounds real. It will sound real because it's a, you know, musicians want to work, you know. So that I love investing in musicians more than anything else, just because it's like honoring their skill, and it makes your projects that much better.
Not only that, but I also think that Jody can speak from his perspective as a library owner. If he has his clients, you know, when a musician brings a quality sounding recording to him, real instrumentation, professional quality mix, Jody, from your perspective, how eager are you, compared to a lot of the other stuff that comes in into your inbox, how eager are you to reach out to that particular individual?
It always grabs my attention right away. When I hear real instruments, I perk up. Because most of what comes in my inbox, and I imagine, I mean, for obvious reasons, most of what comes in my inbox is made in a box. It's a band in a box production, one producer, composer, creating it all with MIDI. And that can be really good. That can sound really good. But when there are live instruments, there's nothing like it. Yeah, it stands out.
So it's marketing as well as quality. Like, the quality is the marketing, because you're going to be able to sell it to a library or place it with a library, because like you said, I mean, it immediately is going to stand out. And then it's easier for you to land that in a project because, hey, this is real brass, or this is real drums, like whatever it is. It's, you're not having to like convince anybody because it is authentic at that point. And so I'm all about, if it's an authentic, and that's with the relationships that I have with the libraries that I work with, it's pretty much expected now, like if it's an authentic, unique instrument like strings, brass, drums, certain of those elements that are really hard to mimic, it's going to be live. It's going to be the real thing. Otherwise, there's no point. And again, and that, I think that just really, really gives you a leg up on everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. You can mock it up, right? You can create it with MIDI and mock it up and play the brass and play the strings, and then find your team, put your team in place, have several teams, I would say, several string players to go to, right? I mean, you could probably speak more to that, Dave.
Yeah, and again, like, it's when you think about musicians, like they're not your enemies, like they're looking for work. And like I did two projects last fall, both of which had multiple Grammy Award winning musicians on it, and absolute A-list, the same guys that are playing on films and major budget projects are I'm hiring, you know what I mean? And obviously I'm going to pay them as well as Hans Zimmer is going to pay them, and I'm going to treat them, hopefully I'm going to try to treat them as best as I possibly can, and everything. And the results are just, you can't argue with it. It just is going to be, they're bringing so many things to the table that you can't even comprehend. And one other little tip about that is that I learned from another composer: when you're doing a project and you're mocking it up, don't put any effort into making the brass or strings sound good. Like when I do a project that's going to have brass, I'll use the most terrible sounding brass, like basic MIDI, general MIDI brass patch on my mock-ups to present to the library, so that it's like understood, we're going to replace that. And then it makes it sound that much better when it's got the live stuff on it, because it's like, and then you're not wasting your time on something you're going to replace anyway. And so I literally will use it sounds like a Casio keyboard demo.
A kazoo.
Yeah, but it's basically I'm writing the parts. And then one other little thing with that is, another investment is, it's very much worth it, if you're going to do that, to hire an arranger or an orchestrator to do the charts, because it's one other thing where there's a little bit of nuance to what an actual orchestrator is going to do, and it's another few $100 investment. I could orchestrate it myself. I mean, I took orchestration in college and everything, but like, I just believe that certain steps in the process, if I'm going to be putting my music in front of A-list Grammy Award winning musicians, I want to put them in the best position to do their thing without having any issues. And so I just appreciate having that extra set of hands on the project to make it that much better.
Can you clarify something for some people that are watching? Because I know someone's going to hear what you just said and say, oh, I can just put really cheap sounding brass on it and pitch it to the library and let them know, hey, don't worry about the cheap brass, I'm going to replace it. You're doing this when you have that relationship.
Yeah. So your first, you can't just, if you don't have a relationship ahead of time, you've got to prove, you would need to have something that you've done that already has brass on it, or it helps to, it would probably be very hard to just convince someone you don't know, that you can do that. You need to prove it, obviously.
And you don't know if they're going to read your email either. So if they just hit play and hear it.
Yeah, don't take anything for granted. So another little trick that I'll be happy to share that I started doing is, there's a couple of ways to do this. Like if I have a paying client that wants to put brass on a song, right? Like an artist, I'll say, okay, sweet. So I'll charge them whatever it would cost me to get like at least an hour of time with the studio and the musicians. But it's only going to take the band 15 minutes to record, 15, 20 minutes max. So that leaves me 40 minutes of time that's already paid for technically and I'm basically not going to make any profit okay, because I'm taking that, instead of saying, okay, well, I'm going to charge, it's $500 an hour and it's only going to cost me like 15 minutes of that, so it's really like $150, whatever. I'm just kind of spitballing the math out there, but instead of just saying, hey, I could make like a $350 profit, I'm going to reinvest that time and throw a couple extra projects on there. So I might have a couple of demos that I've written that include live brass or live strings, and then I'll stick those on the end of the session, and then I've got pitches ready that have the live brass. And so and I've piggybacked multiple projects that way, where like I'll do one more song at the end of a project. So like I did a pep band album for Megatrax last winter, and the demo from that was from a session I did like a year before that. And I had this idea to do this like hip hop drumline pep band thing. So I had a session for something else, stuck the demo on. So I had a demo, and then so when I pitched the idea, it already had the live brass on it. And then I did that project, and at the end of that session, I had this idea to do this like cool modern Cuban album. And so I had them do a demo for that, which I pitched to Warner Chappell. Warner Chappell picked up that project, and so that cycle just keeps kind of perpetuating itself to where that way you're not having to convince anybody.
Love that.
Does that make sense? You have to think. You got to think smart. You don't want to just it gets expensive otherwise.
I think there are two things we can summarize this entire conversation down to. The first one is that you're only working with a small handful of companies to represent your music.
Yeah, I've got there's really about 3 or 4 that I work with regularly. That I have a bunch of other ones, but there's ones that I feel like have built good relationships with that I'm more focused on.
Right. So when it comes to the licensing side, having a representative or a library or a sync agent represent your song catalog or portions of your song catalog, you only need to have a handful that you've really focused on building those relationships. So that's one big lesson.
Definitely.
The second one, which I think is actually even more important, is I think it can be summarized with the phrase, when you treat this like a profession, it will pay you like a profession.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. And I think treating yourself, like acting like you're really doing this, like you are a professional and you're the real deal. Like you don't have to fake it. Just do it. Just do the real thing.
Yeah.
Go for it. And I think that, again, it felt a lot more terrifying at first, but now that once you get that wheel turning, it's not so scary. So yeah. And I have tracks with probably 10 different between sync agents and catalogs. But again, you go back and look at the success rate, and the ones that have projects that are super successful, they're going to want to work with you again. And I'm going to want to work with them again because we're all making money. And so I, of course, am going to go be focused on the people that have interest in what I'm doing. If I have a project and it just kind of sits there, it's not really doing anyone any good. So, but yeah.
Awesome, Dave. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Jody, do you have anything you want to add?
No, this has been awesome. We spoke about longevity and having a long career and working with a few select people. I think like Michael and Dave, you both hit on that. It's so important not to get overwhelmed by all the supervisors and all the libraries and all the sync agents. You just find your people and nurture those relationships, and you'll have a long, healthy career. You're a great example of that, Dave, and a great example for anyone who's aspiring to become a sync titan like yourself.
Cool. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you guys and the community. It's been awesome to be part of.
If you would like to join a thriving community of elite sync professionals dedicated to ensuring each other's success in sync licensing, then Elite Music Coaching invites you to join Sync Titan.
That's right. And inside this community, you're going to have opportunities to connect directly with sync professionals like music supervisors, sync agents, and music library reps in our monthly virtual meetup and networking events. You're going to be able to get coaching directly from Jody and myself. We have listening sessions, and we also have meetups where you can connect with other collaborators all throughout the world.
Also, we post opportunities for you to submit your music to films, TV shows, trailers, commercials, video games, podcasts, web series, and more. As a Sync Titan member, you're also eligible to receive a Sync Titan award.
So make sure to click the link below or above or to the side or wherever it is on this channel so that you can learn more about Sync Titan and how you can become a valued member of this community.